Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at the Weimar Constitution. A country's constitution is the list of its most fundamental laws and structures that help it govern. The Weimar Constitution had to be brand new. There were strengths to this, but there were also some rules that seemed to be a threat to democracy, as this cartoon with the coffin suggests. Let's get into it. Let's remind ourselves about the Weimar Republic. In November 1918, the Kaiser, or King of Germany, abdicated or quit. Germany agreed to an armistice with the Allies, and a new government was set up. Escaping the rioting in the cities, Chancellor Friedrich Ebert established a new government in the town of Weimar. One of their first jobs was to agree to a new constitution, a set of rules by which Germany would be governed. Germany had not been a democracy before. Could the National Assembly, elected by the German people, agree to a constitution that would be democratic and stable, while still allowing decisive action in a crisis? Well, that was the puzzle that they were trying to solve, and let's see what solution they came up with. This is a basic version of how the Weimar Constitution structured government. The head of state was the president. Unlike the Kaiser, the president was elected every 7 years. He had no role in day-to-day politics, but instead chose the Chancellor who would do this. However, he could rule by decree in a crisis. This was a very important rule in the Constitution that was known as Article 48, rule by decree. This meant that in an emergency, the President could override the powers of the Chancellor and the Reichstag and effectively pass laws on his own. However, the intention of this was that it would only be used in the most dire of emergencies, not regularly. Otherwise, it would have harked back to the autocracy or one-person rule of the Kaiser. Below the President, but actually taking a more active role in day-to-day government, was the government itself. Leading this was the Chancellor. The Chancellor was the head of the government and chose the main government ministers who made up the cabinet, and the cabinet were the most important decision makers and ministers in government. They were drawn from the Parliament or lawmakers. This was split into two different bodies. There was the Reichstag, who were elected every 4 years. They controlled taxation and they voted on key laws. But also the Reichsrat. They were also elected every 4 years and they represented the regions. Bigger regions often sent more deputies to the Reichstag. It should be recognised that deputies here is synonymous with the word MPs in British politics. And then you have the electorate, voters, the German people themselves. This was where it became quite revolutionary compared to many other European systems. Germany was one of the first countries in Europe to allow all men and women over 21 the vote. That's right, Germany had voting equality before the United Kingdom. The electorate or voters, through elections, elected the Reichstag, the Reichsrat and the President. And by extension, the Chancellor was usually chosen from the most powerful party in the Reichstag. Notice I say usually. That didn't always happen, as we'll see. So you've got elections to the Reichstag, but you've also got elections to the President. Germany, therefore, was a democracy. There were several strengths to this constitution. Article 1 of the Constitution confirmed that Germany was now a democracy, with people having a say in choosing their leaders. The voting age was reduced from 25 to 21 for both men and women. The Reichstag was elected by proportional representation. This meant that even small parties got a say, with one deputy or representative being appointed for every 60,000 votes received. That did have its weaknesses though, as we'll see. There were also a series of checks and balances on who actually held the power. The President chose the Chancellor and could also dismiss him. Both the President and the Reichstag were elected by the German people. If they didn't please the people or run the country well, they would be voted out at the next election. The Chancellor proposed laws, but the Reichstag had to vote on them. And the Reichstag was the most powerful part of the government, but the Reichsrat could challenge and delay new laws, a little bit like the House of Lords in Britain. There was a mix of central and local government too, reflecting Germany's traditional federal structure. After all, Germany had only become a country in 1871, and these federal structures were really well in place. And don't forget, Germany was a very big country and very populous for the time. There were also weaknesses with the constitution. Proportional representation that we've mentioned before, this was the system by which every 60,000 votes got a deputy in the Reichstag, led to coalition governments. This is where parties had to team up with each other in order to command a majority. It was incredibly difficult for any one party to get a majority, and so they had to team up with the others. This led to compromises and disagreements. While these things were being discussed, they were often slow to take action, and they lacked clear policies. Also, governments often fell as a result. There were 9 governments in the first 4 years of the Weimar Republic, hardly the stability that Germany badly needed. This lack of decisive action could lead to weakness in responding to a crisis. It was also hard to pass laws. This could be a good thing. Some laws are rushed and bad. From 1930, as economic crisis hit, chancellors increasingly relied on the president's emergency powers, Article 48. This was supposed to only be used in emergencies, and yet increasingly the president ruled like the leader of the government, which he was never really meant to be. The constitution also seemed weak. People had been used to strong, autocratic leaders like the Kaiser. Article 48 made the president seem autocratic too. Government had also been established by violence by Friedrich Ebert. Despite being a democracy, Ebert had used force to establish the Weimar government. The next video on the uprisings will go into more detail about that. Have a think then. Do the weaknesses outweigh the strengths? Weaknesses with the constitution were made worse still by the sheer variety of different parties in the Reichstag. Remember that proportional representation meant that even the smaller parties got a small say in the Reichstag. Although this seemed fair, it often made government difficult. Some parties supported the Weimar Republic. This included the socialists like the SPD and the centrists like the Zentrum Party. They both wanted democracy to flourish. Where it gets a bit more complicated is with the moderate nationalists, like the German People's Party and the German Nationalist People's Party. They had conservative and nationalist views and quite missed the autocracy of the Kaiser, but they supported the Weimar Republic begrudgingly. Then, at the extremes, there are the communists and the extreme nationalists who would later become the fascists and Nazis. The communists wanted a workers' revolution. This would involve the destruction of the Weimar Republic. And the extreme nationalists also wanted to destroy democracy and return to a system with one strong leader. And yet all of these people were participating within the debates in the Reichstag. And this could make things very, very difficult to agree. Our final points then. The main features of the Weimar Constitution were that the president was the head of state, elected every 7 years. He chose the chancellor who led day-to-day government. The Reichstag and Reichsrat were elected every 4 years. And the government was made up of ministers from the ruling party in the Reichstag. This had several strengths. The constitution was democratic. All Germans over 21 had the vote. That's men and women. It combined central and national government with Germany's traditional local government. And proportional representation meant that every vote counted and all parties got a say. However, there were several weaknesses too. Proportional representation led to coalition governments. These frequently collapsed when they disagreed. And perhaps most seriously, Article 48 allowed the president to rule without the Reichstag in a crisis. This made the government and democracy appear weak and slow in an emergency. In truth, Article 48 was only ever intended to be used in an emergency, but the weakness of many of the coalition governments meant that many chancellors felt forced to use it in order to get laws passed quickly enough. And that perhaps explains the meaning of the cartoon we saw at the start and in the top right corner here. We see Article 48 presented as a coffin, and within it is the Reichstag representing German democracy. So did Article 48 tempt too many people to think that Germany was still an autocracy? Well, our story will help reveal that. But this was a start. The new government had a structure. It had a set of basic laws, and Germany was looking forward to a democratic future. I think we all know how that ends though. More on that another time. Thanks for watching this video, and if it's been useful, please do like it and subscribe to the channel. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.